Welcome to another episode of the Business of Speed podcast. Excited to be back with Nick Bratton. We're coming out of the holidays and we're into that early January piece. Excited to talk training specifically around everyone's favorite topic, which is NFL Combine prep, because it's in the thick of it right now. Everybody's a week in, and at the same time, those heavily involved with baseball, you guys are in the final months. Like for me, I'm not working with a ton of baseball athletes at the time, but Nick, when does that season really get going for you guys at this point, whether it's high school, college, and even your pro level guys?
Yeah, well, high school is kicking off right now in Louisiana and down in the South. All of our guys are practicing 5 days a week at this point. First competitions are going to be January 20th. And so, we're really only about 10 days out from their first competition. For our major and minor league guys, they're going to report here in about a month of spring training. So we only have about 3 or 4 weeks left, depending on what team they're with, how early they got to show up, what year they're in. But yeah, we're really down to the final push to get everybody ready to go.
Yeah. And what is the final push look like for you guys before we jump into NFL Combine prep, which is always our fun topic from the speed side? So many times we still have coaches talking about just getting that last minute conditioning in, which personally I've always felt is a complete joke when we talk about baseball specifically. When we talk about the metabolic demands. Mm-hmm. Is there still time for them to be getting speed development in, or a lot of the programming looking like it's just maintenance time, just getting them that final push, make sure they're as healthy as possible before the season starts? Where are you guys going with what you're doing with your athletes?
Yeah, I think it really depends on how they showed up to us. We have some guys that the season ends in October. They show up as soon as everything is over and they're ready to go. And for those guys with that long-term ability to be able to develop them, we're able to take our time from a movement standpoint and building up the strength, building up accelerative qualities. Whereas I've got some guys that showed up this week and, we have 1 month to get them ready to go. And so a lot of it is just like the gross movement patterns, cleaning up anything that we notice has kind of fallen off from the year before, really looking at how their season went the year prior. What does their defensive play look like? What do their offensive, like stolen bases, look like? Being able to really put together the picture of what last year was and then decide what we're going to do now. For those long-term guys, we're to the point now where, we're really just trying to get that last bit out of them. We're working on max velocity type work. We're working on making sure that, they're truly resilient. We're working on making sure that they have an understanding of what some of these different acceleration models look like. What it looks like when we're doing base running type work, what it looks like when they're more in the field, and it's more of a reactive acceleration, as opposed to the guys that are more short term. Right now, we're just trying to make sure that they're building up the strength, the power in order to be able to get into season and look really good before they get to their team strength coaches. Yeah. We had talked a little bit before we started recording. A lot of our guys are given programs by some of their team coaches, and it doesn't address the quality of the movements that they're going through. More of it is just a quantity standpoint. Yeah. And so helping them understand that, the quantity will come, and I'm not worried about that. It's a long season. They're going to show up in February and play until October. The quantity will come, but it's helping them to understand that it's the quality that I'm really focused on right now that's really going to help them to move optimally and to be able to stay healthy throughout the season. So again, it really comes down to how long we've had them at this point.
And it's a challenge, like we always laugh when we read some of these programs that are just essentially conditioning, where you're just adding more and more volume every single day. It's a daunting task to remotely write a speed program for athletes if you're not in the thick of a speed training mindset. For me now, as I've stepped away from training every day, that's where I spend a lot of my time, is writing these remote speed training and jump performance training opportunities for athletes and teams. And yeah, it takes time, and you got to get feedback from the players. You got to get feedback from the people that are running those programs, even if it's a coach of their sport that's taking them through that. And it would be easier just to say, well, just stay in shape by doing this.
Mm-hmm.
But man, it is a challenge that you can take on with a little bit more effort, a little bit more intentionality to really offer these athletes value, beyond just being in shape. If you were going to be remotely programming without saying it depends, that answer isn't allowed this year on the podcast. Where would you like really start when you say, well, I'm going to be programming for this athlete or these few athletes remotely as a college strength coach? I'm setting them a program to do at home. Where are you
Mm-hmm.
going to start with trying to just get them actually doing speed development? What type of thing are you going to have them doing?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something we actually do very often too,
Mm-hmm.
especially baseball guys. We'll have them reach out for help from a speed standpoint. It's just like anything else. We're going to start with the mechanics.
Yeah.
We're going to spend time. Anybody's got a wall that they can lean up against to go through some wall drill type work. Anybody can set up a phone 5 or 10 yards away and go through 10-yard starts. And so we're going to have them go through those mechanics first. I'm going to rely a little more heavily on things like switches and dribbling and things that I don't do as often in the facility because I can get hands on. But really helping them to feel the positions that I want them to get into and then starting to build the velocity from there.
Yeah.
Whereas in the facility, I can bounce back and forth between position work, position work, velocity work, and even get them on sleds and things like that. When I'm not able to do that, we're really going to spend a whole lot more time with some of these slow, upright mechanic type drills before we start to get into more of the acceleration type work.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that was one of the things during COVID that I found was insanely effective. Training athletes in their basement was a substantial amount of upright technique work led
Yeah,
to such better posture and mechanics when I got them in front of me again.
yeah,
Just simply switches, A marches, dribbles, high knee runs in place, that band around the hips in place, just really working front side, getting that toe up in front. It seemed like, man, this has got to be a waste. You just keep doing these drills endlessly. But they really started to get their pattern into that front position, and they ran smoother than they'd ever run before because of such a heavy dose of that with minimal bad reps outside of that. And that idea
right.
of pairing it, and that's so simple, but it gets missed when you say like, "Hey, just go run 40 yards, go run 50 yards, run a quarter mile, walk a quarter mile." Like that stuff, you just miss out on any sort of technical improvement.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I love to take our athletes through from a conceptualization side of things is have them go through a high knees or an A run and then just lean into an acceleration and help them to understand that your acceleration is just the high knees
Yeah.
position. The cyclical action that happens is because your foot contacts the ground and the ground is moving underneath you. But you can just go through this movement in place and still clean up the mechanics, still clean up the foot contact with the ground, how you're going through that repetitive cycling movement, and understanding like what that is supposed to feel like without even gaining any ground or moving anywhere. And so helping them to understand that, just like you said, there are ways that we can go about this in a small space before we actually have to get out and let them go.
Yeah, I love that. And when we talk about baseball, we always talk about the standard for baseball testing is the 60-yard dash for some godforsaken reason. It doesn't naturally actually apply to anything. And when we talk about football, it's the 40-yard dash is the number that matters. And it's always discussed every single year around this time is, does it have value? Is it worth training for? And I love that we can kind of just share our thoughts on it year after year. Sometimes they stay the same. Maybe it changes a little bit. For you, as this NFL Combine prep period is starting, we actually have some college teams still playing. We just saw like the national championship is going to be happening. So you're missing a bunch of guys that are going to be behind anyways from that. But how much value is there in that 40-yard dash from your perspective?
As far as carryover to play,
Or just value to assess?
I mean, for you and I think that we could get a lot of value out of
Yeah.
it because it tells educated coaches a lot about how they move. Now, value for owners and GMs, I don't know how much there is to it. I think you and I can go back and forth with 2 or 3 dozen exercises that would be significantly more beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that. Yeah, when you have a brief window to be able to assess somebody's ability and their what they're going to bring to a team, great. It's an easy, quick one, raw speed. I'm not a big fan of the 40, but I think the 40 makes more sense than the 60 does for baseball. And so, we're arguing over pointless movements.
Yeah.
But again, for somebody like you or I think it gives us a lot of insight into an athlete's interaction with the ground, an athlete's coordination and rhythm. I was talking about this with my staff yesterday, and understanding the importance of rhythm and timing and flow as we go through movements, and being able to evaluate which of these guys are true movers, are fluid movers. I think that, again, even a qualified coach that's been doing this for a long period of time can watch some of these guys at the combine and be able to say, okay, that guy is running a 40 based on a lot of natural ability and talent, and that guy's been coached up. We can see the technical pieces that are not a part of his regular everyday movements. And so, again, I think that, sure, it gives you a raw number as far as what their speed may be. But I don't think that anybody on these teams is picking up information that's going to be very useful to the majority of positions on the field.
Yeah. And I think if we can fall into the trap of Al Davis and just you routinely just draft the fastest wide receiver possible to have the fastest team possible. But I think with any sport, when you are doing any sort of combine or assessment piece, is the number one tool to assess is going to be game film. Just what do they actually do on the field? And then when you say, well, all right, well, we have two similar productive athletes at the same position, now we start looking at some of the reasons why I want to draft them or why am I not going to draft them. This one has the speed that I know needs to be there to compete on the field. Great. Same thing with some of the strength. I mean, the change of direction tests, I'm currently working on a little bit of a comparison article with some of my thoughts and just anecdotal experiences through coaching athletes. At TC Boost, we did a ton of combine work, and we practiced those freaking tests every day, choreographed it down to the slightest breath that they were going to take and when they were going to exhale. And so you really start to question, does this have validity to say that this is a test of anything, first of all? Number two, is this a test of change of direction ability? Maybe. It's definitely not agility. I'll tell you that. It's not at all agility. There's nothing you're reacting to. And so the validity of, is that indicative of an athlete playing at a high level, or this is why I'm going to draft somebody versus not drafting somebody? Those tests just start to fall away. I mean, what have you seen from some of those change of direction, quote unquote, tests? Things you like or don't like?
Again, it depends on if
don't you say it. Don't you say it.
Yeah, right. It depends on if you or eyes are on it, or a team's eyes are on it. Because when you and I are looking at it, you and I are able to tell, and a lot of good coaches are able to tell, an athlete's ability to absorb and produce force, somebody's ability to get into certain positions, to change hip height, and be able to displace themselves a little bit better. But on the flip side, you can also tell that a lot of this is choreographed. The number of times that you've watched a 5-10-5 or a pro agility, and it's like, okay, that is an unnatural movement. The movement that you just went through makes no sense.
Yeah.
I would almost rather you just go out and show me your ability to go through a shuffle over 5 yards, a crossover run for 5 yards, and then a hip turn to a sprint.
Yeah.
I would rather you just take some raw movements and show me how you complete those and go through those, because again, I'd rather have an athlete who's able to move that then I can put them into the positions that they need to be in, as opposed to giving you a choreographed dance to go through.
100%.
So, Steve, you alluded to, your article that you're putting together. I would like to hear, maybe 2 or 3 drills that you think that would be more beneficial, whether you think that it would be beneficial for set positions or just for football athletes in general.
Yeah, I think the 180 cut is the movement that I just really believe in, that we have been doing for years now. As I was writing this article, I was looking back, and when I first went and visited with the Milwaukee Bucks and took it from them. That was 2015. So I've been running that test as my main test, quote unquote. It's also a training tool. It's not just a test that we run. And that is a 5 yard lead in to timed gates, and then 5 yards to a line after the gate. You touch the line with your foot and you run back through. However, it's so simple, it actually will replicate cutting on the field because you're not trying to touch your hand. We're not working on this extreme bent position. You can also change the gait and locomotion patterns that you want to do. You can do a shuffle into a sprint out of it. You can do a sprint into a shuffle into it. You can do a shuffle into a back pedal out of it and still get times that you can vary and compare across people if you want to. But it allows you to actually have just a little bit more of a, you're trying to go fast in and out of a cut. That's it. I want to see how you can just cut. I don't need this choreographed of you're going 5 to your left, 10 to your right, 5 back. Like, it's just such a silly movement. And the same when we talk about the drill that's not done at the combine, but a T drill, where you're going forward, shuffling, and then backpedaling. Like, is that really let me know you're a good basketball player? No, you don't backpedal like that. You don't really shuffle with that kind of intensity straight sideways. Is it really indicative of anything? I don't know. 3-cone drill the same way. The 1-8 cut is so simple, and you can vary it as much as you want to. Like when you said, Nick, you can say this is a crossover run in and out. Time it. Sweet. All right. You got to do a sprint in, backpedal out. You're going to do a sprint in, shuffle out of it. You're going to shuffle in, sprint out of it. All those are timed. And you just get to see how do they move their hips? How do they apply force? What kind of angles do they create? I think the idea of having these hugely standardized tests becomes a little silly when they're not actually testing anything that you want to do. And that example I always give is I choreographed way too many high school athletes to have very competitive 5-10-5s that they shouldn't have been able to run those times.
Right.
There's no way. I had a 6'5" guy who was not fast linear speed-wise. He was running a 4.30 5-10-5.
Yeah.
It was lights out. He was like top 5 at every camp he would go to, and he was nowhere else on any of the statistics. But that event, we did hundreds of reps where he fell down, where he missed the line, where we had to restart in order to make that what he was able to do. It just isn't a valuable skill.
Yeah. So another point that you made, and this is something that I think about quite often too, is being able to test true agility. The cognitive side of being able to read and react. So what is a test, or how could we truly test that in a combine type setting to really be able to understand? Because we all know that sport, there's a cognitive side to sport. You cannot just be a great athlete and be a good quarterback, or be a great athlete and be a good wide receiver. Like, you've got to be able to react to some of these things. So how could we design a test that allows us to be able to test those capacities too?
I would say it is not possible to truly test agility. That's my stance, is you can't actually test true agility. Because for me, when I look at true agility, you're having to have reaction to a stimulus in front of you. You're having to react to the speed of that stimulus and your speed. You have to have a spatial awareness component, whether it's a field, a court. You understand how far away you are, how far the sideline is. You have to understand the strategy of what's going on in that situation to say, are they trying to get past you? Are they trying to delay the clock? Like, that's what agility is. And the only thing that comes close is when you're playing a game of tag. That becomes pretty close to actually like sport agility. The thing that you can do is as highly reactive change of direction that you possibly can make. Because anytime that you have any sort of stimulus that they're looking for or waiting for it to flash, now you've changed it from agility to reactive change of direction. And so I think, with, not to pump up Sport React as a company I believe in, but a timing kind of atmosphere that has numerous sensors that give numerous directions to you, whether it's arrows pointing you, it's lights that you have to react to, different angles that you have to go at. That's the only way to kind of get close to an agility component to it. But anytime it's pre-planned to say you're going to run forward, shuffle, backpedal, it doesn't matter how reactive you make that. They know they're either going to react to the left or to the right. And you just keep losing components of agility the more and more that's the setup. And so that's what it is just how many, if you just have like an endless amount of gates and reactive kind of sensors up that point. You have to go through that gate, and then you get through that gate, you have to react to another one, and then you just keep kind of going. And that setup could be all over the field, but it's a lot of a symptom of like if thens is how you program that out. Like if I go through this gate, this will flash either left or right. If it flashes left, then this gate will flash. And it just kind of lets somebody just keep navigating through that to really have to challenge their awareness, their cutting ability, and their speed. That's as close as I think you can get.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I agree, and I think that is the true test that at some point we're going to have to figure out how we standardize to be able to put in things like this.
Yeah. And the standardization is going to be the hardest part. That's
Right.
that's the part that
Right.
you lose with agility, and that's where like you make it as reactive as possible, but it's going to not fit that bill of how do I assess everybody? And that's where my argument always becomes like, this isn't meant to be an assessment that you compare. That is supposed to take place on the field when you're trying to assess agility. Well, how are they agility wise on the field? Like that is the true assessment of agility. This provides us opportunities to train and compete and track and just see if we're getting better and compete against somebody else in a similar training session, but not necessarily that it's going to be a standardized test. And I think that's where we miss the mark.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to another year of 40 times and everybody bragging about how many people they have at the top of the board.
100%. I got 45 guys all ran 4.3 or less. Let's go.
Yes.
That's what it's
Awesome.
going to be. I like it.
And you'll never hear those names again.
And like what's so fun about this time of year is these combines, these end of the training cycle, baseball readiness and lacrosse readiness, they happen right at the start of the year. And for businesses like yours, this is the start of a new year. We're starting to get our business ready for what this next year is going to be. Sometimes these things kick us off to really get a jump start on revenue. But also we talk about the planning that goes into it. And I know we've talked about this before on the podcast, but I don't think you can talk about it enough from conversations I have with different business owners or directors of coaching, where it's constantly a struggle to navigate. I have this peak in business essentially in January, whether it's New Year's resolutions, it's combine preps, it's all this influx of bodies. How do I really get on top of where my business is going to be going trajectory wise? So for Nick, I want to ask you at BSP, what are you guys actively doing to kind of get ahead of this year? Talking about our quarterly planning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that it's important to understand where we're coming from before we worry about where we're going. And so, I had shared with you today when we get wrapped up, my team and I, we will sit down and we will do our 2024 review and our 2025 planning meeting. And so it's understanding, especially for me with a very new staff. I've got 3 employees that have been here for 8 months or less. Mm-hmm. And so being able to help them to get on board and understand like what does this quarterly meeting look like and what are we looking at? So, first being able to reflect back on the year past and look at the wins, look at some of the losses, understand, what went well and what didn't and why, why for each of those. And then be able to put together what we want the coming year to look like. And this is something that I think that as you get bigger and bigger as a facility and as an organization, you do want that feedback from the other individuals that are a part of it, because you want them to have some ownership over what's going on, what they're going to be tasked with. And so, being able to talk about, here are some of our larger overarching goals and some of the things that we want to work on, but what are some of the things that you want to be involved in? What are some of the things that you want to bring on as a part of this team? And so, beginning to plan out what is each quarter going to look like as far as the things that we're working on. As you know, this is a very seasonal business. One thing that's very different for us is in 2024, for the first time, our spring was busier than our fall. We saw a massive influx of volleyball players. Yeah. This weekend, there's going to be a volleyball tournament. We're going to have 75 players representing us. And so, we have way more volleyball players than we've ever had before. And so, we are trying to plan as a facility, what does that look like from a staffing standpoint, from a equipment standpoint, from an outreach standpoint, knowing that, In the past, the spring is when we were able to really kind of regroup and do Con Ed and spend time together. And it's not that anymore. Now it is a busy sprint through the spring. And then you have the summer that always occurs within sports performance facilities. And then you have to make it to next fall before you get a little bit of a reprieve. Yeah. And so, we're looking at some of the things that we're going to be doing as far as working on filling in some of the gaps, getting more adults in here, being able to spend time with some of the smaller team or sports that we haven't been able to spend time with, beefing up our team training, being able to have more of that year-round team training going on. But just knowing what those goals are and then being able to assign individuals to it and decide what those steps are going to be. But really, it's just putting down a plan that you can take action on.
Yeah. And as always with a plan, you're able to then be adaptable. But without a plan, you're just flying by the seat of your pants. And I know so many kind of younger business owners, individual entity coaches, you can get by just having great enthusiasm and you just keep going after stuff. And you just kind of pick up stuff as it comes. But you do reach a point where either as an individual, it becomes overwhelming. You're like, man, I'm constantly trying to figure out where my next team is coming from, my next client is coming from. As a director of coaching or as an owner, you're saying, well, now I have a team that I'm worried about and we have bills that we got to take care of. And I need to make sure that I'm getting some of these things checked off ahead of time so that I'm not just stressed about paying the bills every single month. Like, we want to get ahead of this stuff. Where have you seen a change for you with how you look at this planning piece? Was there a moment in your business where it really became important versus being able to kind of make things happen early on?
Yeah, I think it became really clear to me probably about a year and a half ago, and you and I talk about it all the time, the delay in the work that you're doing, just realizing that because I think that I saw it when we saw a little bit of a churn in our staff, and I saw that we had turned over a coach. There was no real change in the facility, and then about 6 months later, I saw a big change in the facility.
Yeah.
And same thing with our marketing, with our advertising. When we got really, really busy, about 4 or 5 months later, things would start to slow down because we stopped doing the social media, we stopped doing the outreach. And so understanding that we have to always be on top of those things, because even when we do get busy and we let the ball drop on that just means that the slower seasons are going to be that much slower. Mm-hmm. One of the big things that I've also noticed, and Steve, you've probably noticed this in even my business as you've gone through this this evolution with me, is the fact that I can't do everything anymore.
Right.
When you're a young business, when you're a small business, you can still do a lot of things and you can have your hands on a lot of things. And you get to a certain point where you can't do that anymore. Yeah. That I thought the most interesting question I got the other day was somebody came up to me and they said, "What is BSP? Like, what does it stand for?" Because we don't use this logo or this brand anymore.
Yeah.
We only use BSP. Yeah. And I thought that was the coolest thing. There are people that don't know that BSP has any affiliation to me.
Yeah.
They just know that it's the name on the building.
Yeah.
And so I've had to make a transition in the fact that it's no longer about how much can I do in a day. It's how much can I facilitate for my team to be able to do in a day. Yeah. And it's more of me being able to check in and see how I can help provide resources and provide support so that they're able to do those things, instead of me running around and trying to do a little bit of everything every single day in order to keep the ball rolling.
I know in different spectrums of business, so many people struggle with that. It's a scary feeling when you don't feel like your hands are in everything that's going on and you feel like you've just lost control of your business. That when you originally have to do that, eventually it becomes the normal and you understand the rhythm of it. But early on, there's a lot of fear. Did you feel that when you decided, like, here's some things that I need to kind of step back from?
Of course, I still feel the fear. But I came to the realization of, am I just going to be a sole entity that has some individual supporting me,
Yeah.
or am I going to allow this thing to become a larger business brand organization
Yeah.
that I am just a piece within it?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you have to be really honest with yourself.
Yeah.
And you know my passion for leading and teaching and educating others. And if I'm just going to be a sole entity and it's all going to be about what I can do at the end of the day, one, I'm going to be exhausted and I'm not going to be able to do this for very long. And two, I'm not going to have the people around that I want to be able to help and to lead and to educate. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I've got to be willing to let go of some of these things and understand that it's not always going to be done perfect every time. And I think that's the other thing. I was driving home last night and I had that thought, and it's a fairly new thought for me that a loss doesn't mean the end of the game.
Mm-hmm.
If we have one day where something doesn't go perfect, it doesn't mean that everything's over. It's not the end of the world. And understanding that this is a game, and even for me, I always relate everything back to track. There were times where I was in a race and not every aspect of the race went well,
Yeah.
but I just make an adjustment, I make a change.
Yeah.
But because I got a bad start or because I didn't fall in the way that I needed to fall in doesn't mean that it's got to be over. And so, it's me reminding myself that it's little adjustments here and there.
Yeah.
You make a little adjustment, bring yourself back onto course, and when you start to veer the opposite direction, make a little adjustment again to come back that direction. And so, there is still a feeling of fear each and every day,
Yeah.
but it's smaller and smaller
Yeah.
because the more that I let go and I let people step up and take a lead, the more that they're able to prove to me like I've got this
Yeah.
and I can run with this. And so, yeah, I think that everybody feels that. There's never a point where you don't feel it. And as you get bigger and there are more tasks and more things going on, there's different feelings of fear, but it's always there.
Yeah, I think you touched on such a great sports analogy of so many coaches saying that you can't really learn from wins. It takes losses.
Mm-hmm.
And you can always argue that no, that's not necessary. But a loss oftentimes is just can be viewed as a disruption to what the status
Yeah.
quo is. And for your staff, if you're always handling everything, the disruption is now they have to take on some tasks. And even if that's not a true loss, it's just a struggle, it creates an opportunity for growth. And we can get better now because we always had to change the status quo of what happens around here. And we just
Yeah.
fall into the trap of, well, Nick will get it done or Steve will get it done. I don't really need to worry about that. Even though they said they wanted me to do it, I know they'll do it. But once it actually comes push to shove and it's on somebody and they're struggling, that's a great opportunity to grow. Not just
Yeah.
let them hang out there and just struggle.
Well, and I was watching a football game last weekend, and one of the, it came to halftime, and one of the commentators had mentioned, watch this team when they come out from half, because that coach is the best halftime adjuster that you're going to see. And I just thought to myself, I'm like, that is the ultimate compliment as a coach, that you're able to be able to see what's going on, you're able to completely understand what's happening, you're able to make the appropriate adjustments. You're able to communicate those adjustments to your team
Mm-hmm.
in a 15 or 30-minute halftime, and then they're able to go out and capitalize on it.
Yeah.
Like as a coach, that's exactly what you want. As a business owner, that's exactly what you want. To be able to understand what is happening, what needs to be changed, what needs to be adjusted, to be able to communicate that properly, and then to see your team do it. I mean, that's just, I was completely blown away by that comment and felt like that's what I want to be able to say about myself is I'm able to make the real-time adjustments that I need to make to be able to find success.
I love that. And taking it even a step further, I've always admired coaches, especially at the high school level, because you can't control the people that come in and play for you.
Mm-hmm.
But the coaches that are willing to change their systems based on their
Yes.
personnels. And I think that's the same idea in your business is to say, well, here's how I want to run this, and here's what I want everyone on my staff to do. But at the beginning of the year, when you're having this reflection on the previous year and what needs to happen next, to say, here's what I'd love to be able to do. But
Mm-hmm.
my team that I have right now, they don't fit in those spaces.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to adjust the plan instead of just jamming them into that plan and them be frustrated, me be frustrated. And I'm going to kind of put them in positions for them to succeed. We'll make adjustments as we see as we're going. But similarly to that coach, like, man, look at what's in front of you versus just jamming people into what you need.
Yes.
And,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
the challenge that I've been setting as I've had conversations with a few different gym owners, a couple directors of coaching, is a 3-part challenge. And Nick and I were talking about this before we jumped on a little bit. But number one, and this is speaking to you as a leader, is to be absolutely present with your current clients and their families. Be present with them every single day. Not just communicate things to them, not just treat them as a session in an hour and then they're gone. Be present with them in that moment that you're with them. The second part is being present with your staff, which Nick has been touching on. Bringing them in, understanding where they're at, where they're trying to go, what they want to be a part of, but be present with them. I can't tell you the struggles we had early as a facility. When the facility got busy, we'd have no touch points. And we kept saying, well, we'll have touch points 2 months from now because it's going to slow down. And I remember multiple years where we didn't meet all summer long. We just went the whole summer. And then in August, we'd say, how did it go for everybody? How crazy is that? Be present with your current staff as often as you possibly can to understand what's happening. The third part, though, beyond being present, you got to be 90 days ahead of your business. And this is something that we talk about so many times. Nick's mentioned that, man, this happened, and then 6 months later, the business was affected. I've really lived and died on the fact that whatever you're doing now is going to show up 90 days from now, good or bad. Like right now, if you're getting bogged down trying to bring in adults, you're doing combine prep, you're finishing up your baseball, lacrosse athletes, and you just feel like, man, I just got to get all this training in. I got to make sure my staff is doing all this training. But you're not worried, or I shouldn't say worried, but you're not spending time thinking about what's going to happen in March and April. You're going to blink, and it's going to be March and April. And you're going to look around and say, where did all the athletes go? Why don't I have any new athletes coming in? And it's because you spent so much time focusing on who is there right now, you forgot to take time to intentionally think about 90 days from now. And that's the 3-part challenge. Present with your athletes, present with your coaches, 90 days ahead of your business. And let's see what happens when you get to April if this is your best year you've ever had.
Yes, I agree completely. And the best way to be able to do that is plan ahead.
Yeah.
Plan ahead. Plan at the beginning of the quarter. Plan at the beginning of the year, but don't get to February and figure out how to start planning 90 days out when you're there. Don't get into a session and try and figure out, well, how do I be present now? Understand going into that session, what are some of the conversations that I'm going to have? Have I touched base with the parents lately besides asking them for more money?
Correct.
Have I,
Yeah.
so have a plan for all of these things. But yeah, I think those are phenomenal points.
Love it. And guys, be looking for some content coming out. As we've teased already, I'm working through a little bit of an article comparing 5-10-5, the T drill and the cone drill versus the 180 cut, and the value adds that I've seen over the years and 10,000 plus reps of the 180 cut that I might have just gone brain numb after a while of watching those things, but it's my favorite one. Nick, what can we look for kind of coming on your end? Anything you're working on that we can share?
I've got a couple of articles that are already out, but more so, I'm really excited about some of the content that we're going to share on our own Instagram. One of the things that we highlighted in our last meeting and that you and I talked about on our last episode was being able to share more of the things that we're talking about. Whether it's the speed drills that we're doing, whether it's the business or leadership segments that we're talking about, but being able to give actual detail and visualizations of what's going on from a day-to-day standpoint. One thing you and I always talk about is we're in the trenches. This is not something where you and I talk about theory or things that we've seen done, but it's the things that we're doing each and every day. So just being able to share visualizations of that and what's going on.
Appreciate you guys listening.